Jake El Paul!
A surprising lineup of well-known figures openly placed their support behind Jake Paul before he ever climbed into the ring with Anthony Joshua. It's easy to dismiss those choices as simple clickbait. The Gypsy King siding with an influencer. A promoter turned icon forecasting a shock result. A respected MMA personality suggesting the outsider could land the single punch that decides everything. But if you actually hear what these men truly said, there's reasoning behind every contrarian call. Belief in a puncher's opportunity, acknowledgement of progress in a non-traditional fighter, and a realization that at heavyweight, more than any other division, one clean shot can flip odds and careers. Tyson Fury's take was the loudest and the most headline-grabbing. Fury didn't qualify or joke. He said he'd back Paul, even declaring he'd wager £1 million on the underdog and bluntly stating Jake Paul knocks AJ out 100%. That statement hit like an explosion because Fury is not just another voice. He's a former world champion who demands attention. When Fury said he believed AJ was finished and that Paul was ascending, he was doing two things simultaneously. He was challenging Joshua's direction and adding real credibility to Paul's chances simply by backing them publicly. Fans who follow heavyweight boxing heard Fury and instantly reassessed the possibilities. Because when a heavyweight of Fury's status openly bets on an upset, the public story changes, not because the numbers move, but because heavyweight boxing has always been a sport where confidence and belief matter as much as spreadsheets.
Talk about possibly Joshua using Jake Paul as a tune-up to fight you. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know about tune-up. I think Jake Paul knocks him out.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Why so? What impresses you about Jake Paul?
I just think Jake Paul would knock AJ out. I think AJ's a spent force, and I think Jake Paul's on the rise. And I like his new heavyweight look.
Oscar de la Hoya's voice carried a different tone. He's a promoter with a fighter's instincts and a lifetime of in-ring judgment to draw from, and he went to social media to reveal his stance. He said he was predicting a Jake Paul knockout. For de la Hoya, that wasn't just a flashy opinion. It was a promoter's acknowledgement that Paul's path has been about more than publicity tricks. It has been about visible development in a body of work that, while controversial to purists, has delivered outcomes. When someone who has launched careers and evaluated fighters for decades says the underdog can win by knockout, he's pointing to tangible signs, power that looks real on film, timing that is sharpened, and a confidence that can turn the idea of one perfect punch into a realistic scenario rather than a fantasy. De La Hoya's prediction reads like the type of call made by someone who has studied enough footage to believe that what seems unlikely is actually achievable. You also had legitimate combat sports athletes outside the boxing bubble making the same leap. Demetrius Johnson, the former UFC flyweight champion whose elite timing and fight IQ define his career, said plainly that he thought Jake could land the kind of short, awkward punch that has undone Joshua before. Johnson didn't present his view as tribal support. He framed it as a technical possibility. He referenced the history, the way Joshua has been caught by short overhand rights in past defeats, and suggested that Paul's unconventional angles and punching habits could trigger that same outcome. That's not a media stunt. It's a technical assessment from someone who spends his life analyzing how one fighter's quirks can exploit another's known weaknesses. It's the kind of voice that shifts conversations among coaches and bettors alike because it says, this upset isn't just noise. It's a plausible outcome rooted in an observed pattern. Rolando Romero, a fighter who built his reputation on swagger and self-belief, went in a different direction, less technical and more cultural. Romero's case for Paul centered on a narrative few analysts like to say out loud, plot armor. He framed the matchup as one where Paul's momentum, charisma, and ability to command massive money opportunities function as advantages themselves. To Romero, the fact that Paul wouldn't be there unless he believed he could win pointed to a kind of engineered confidence, almost like narrative fuel that carries into the ring. That's not a scientific metric. But in the modern attention economy of combat sports, narrative can tilt a fight in subtle ways. Judges, crowd energy, and fighter psychology are all sensitive to the storylines built during the build-up. Romero's pick was therefore part bravado, part cultural read. In a world where spectacle matters, Paul's spectacle could become a weapon. You didn't need every believer to be a boxer or a promoter. Nate Diaz, the combative everyman of fight culture who exists at the intersection of MMA fandom and street credibility, backed his words with action by betting on Paul. That move, a public wager, is a small but meaningful signal. A $20,000 bet from someone like Diaz isn't just betting theater. It's a public stamp that the upset is real enough to risk money on. When fighters or well-known figures in the broader fight community put money on an underdog, it shapes how a wider audience views the matchup. It's social proof of volatility. People who follow UFC and boxing noticed, and some of them recalibrated Paul's chances as a result. Betting isn't an oracle, but it's a cultural thermometer, and Diaz's wager raised the temperature around the possibility of a Paul win. You also heard supporting voices that focused less on improbable miracles and more on technical opportunity. Paulie Malignaggi, a former pro who has become one of boxing's sharper analysts, spoke openly about ways Paul could make the fight competitive. Malignaggi's commentary wasn't a flat claim that Paul would win. It was an exploration of a possible route to victory. He outlined how Paul could use movement, clinch work, and intelligent infighting to neutralize Joshua's size and create openings for a big shot. Those breakdowns matter because they give shape to the idea that Paul could win. They aren't just fan chatter. They're road maps that could be followed in training. When analysts like Paulie sketch those paths to victory, the underdog's chance shifts from fantasy to a plan that coaches could, in theory, execute.
With AJ, the way he handled Francis Ngannou, who I think was also a bit of a sideshow fight, but was much more dangerous than Jake Paul. And you saw the way AJ took that very seriously and got rid of his opponent very, very quickly and in a destructive fashion. I see something similar here in this situation. But, you know, these are discussion points, talking points.
There were also smaller but still significant endorsements from fighters who understand what it means to step into danger and come out on top. Andy Ruiz Jr., the man who famously shocked Anthony Joshua in 2019, offered Paul practical advice and encouragement, publicly telling him, in simple terms, not to be afraid. That kind of support shouldn't be overlooked. Ruiz's opinion carries weight because he has lived that exact moment of dethroning Joshua. His belief that Paul could discover a similar route to victory comes from lived experience. He understands the angles where Joshua can be vulnerable. His guidance to Paul signaled that at least some former opponents recognized openings a focused challenger could exploit. When someone who has already beaten your opponent offers strategy and belief, that is a genuine vote of confidence. What connects all of these predictions isn't blind hope, but a set of recurring arguments. Paul has improved. Heavyweights are unpredictable. Joshua has been caught before by awkward, short punches. And celebrity backing or narrative momentum can bend the context of a fight in unexpected ways. These aren't bizarre rationales. They are combined explanations drawn from fight footage, past results, and the modern economics of sport. Tyson Fury's £1 million bet was theatrical, but his claim that Joshua was a spent force comes from watching his career arc. Demetrius Johnson's technical breakdown of short overhands points directly to real moments in Joshua's loss history. Oscar de la Hoya's knockout prediction follows the same technical eye and promotional instinct that has guided him for decades. Romero and Diaz lean more into psychological and cultural dynamics, plot armor, public momentum, and those forces matter too because they can influence how a fighter approaches a bout and how a crowd responds when momentum shifts. It's also important to understand why each voice carried its own kind of weight. Fury's support moved markets and discussion because of his heavyweight status. De La Hoya's call mattered because he's a promoter who knows how underdogs turn dangerous when attention economics change. Johnson's analysis counted because he's an elite combat athlete translating patterns across sports. Ruiz's quiet advice mattered because he's already done it. Romero and Diaz added raw, street-level belief that often fuels upsets. Paulie's tactical outlines provided a blueprint for the theory. Taken together, these picks created a framework showing that Jake's chances weren't just bravado, but a network of plausible, cross-checked possibilities.
What is your prediction, Jake?
Probably the 6th or 7th round knockout.
And that's it.
I'm fucking him up, Burial! I'm fucking him up!
None of this removes the reality that betting markets and most boxing purists lean toward Joshua. But the contrarian chorus transformed the matchup into more than a presumed walkover. It turned it into a genuine dramatic event precisely because credible voices argued the upset was possible. In that way, the predictions favoring Jake Paul did exactly what predictions are meant to do. They shifted the atmosphere, nudged the markets, and added depth to how fans and bettors approached the fight. They pushed everyone to consider more than punch statistics and resume comparisons. They compelled the boxing world to account for narrative, momentum, and the volatility of a single punch. That's it for today's video. Stay tuned.